The plate cost $6.73. Clara had seen it 1,000 times. Scrambled eggs gone cold, toast buttered too thick, green beans that nobody ordered but came with the special anyway. But she'd never seen hands shake like that over it. Thin, bony fingers hovering above the fork like it might vanish if he blinked. It was 2:47 a.m. when the boy stumbled into Dream Diner. Rain hammered the windows so hard the neon sign flickered twice, casting his face in bursts of red and shadow. His gray hoodie had a tear at the shoulder, the kind that doesn't come from catching it on a fence. The kind that comes from someone grabbing you hard enough to rip the fabric in the skin beneath it. Clara watched him count the coins. Once, twice, 3 times. His lips moved with the numbers. Quarters, dimes, pennies spread across the booth like a confession. $4.19. Not enough. She saw the exact moment he accepted it. The way his shoulders collapsed inward, the way his hands started sweeping the coins back toward his pocket with the mechanical precision of someone who'd done this before. Who'd always done this. "Coffee's on the house tonight, sweetheart," Clara said, sliding the plate in front of him anyway. "And looks like the kitchen made an extra special. Hate to see it go to waste." The boy looked up at her then, and Clara saw something that would haunt her for reasons she couldn't yet name. Eyes that had already learned not to hope, watching her like she was a mirage that would disappear the moment he reached for it. He ate like he was stealing. Like the food would be snatched away if he didn't finish fast enough. Steam rose from the plate, curling between them, and when he finally looked up again, there were tears cutting clean lines down his dirty face. "Thank you," he whispered in an accent she couldn't place. Then he did something strange, pulled a pen from his pocket and wrote 4 words on the paper napkin in careful, deliberate strokes. "I will repay this meal." Then he was gone, swallowed by the rain and the 2 a.m. darkness of a city that ate boys like him for breakfast. Claire kept the napkin. She didn't know why. Tucked it in her apron pocket and forgot about it until she got home, then pressed it flat in her Bible between the Psalms, where it turned brown at the edges like a prophecy written in grease and gratitude. 18 years later, a man in a $15,000 Tom Ford suit stood outside Dream Diner, watching rain slide down the same neon sign, now barely hanging on by frayed wires. The neighborhood had rotted around it. Boarded windows, needle caps in the gutters, the kind of street where people disappeared and nobody asked questions. He'd bought 47 diners looking for this one. 47 identical stainless steel counters, cracked vinyl booths, coffee pots that never quite got hot enough. Each time he'd walk in at 2:47 a.m., order the special, and wait for a waitress who might remember a starving boy who counted coins in the dark. Each time it was the wrong woman, the wrong diner, the wrong life. But not tonight. Because tonight, through the rain-streaked window, he could see her. Older now, silver threading through her hair, but still wearing that blue and white uniform, still moving with that same graceful efficiency, still looking at the broken people who stumbled through her door like they deserved dignity. His name was Sun. They called him the Silent King of the 7 Dragons. He owned 12 blocks of Chicago's underworld, laundered money through 17 legitimate businesses, and had a standing kill order on 3 rival bosses who'd made the mistake of thinking silence meant weakness. But right now, standing outside Dream Diner with his heart hammering against his ribs like he was 12 years old again, he was just a boy who owed a debt. A debt written in Korean on a napkin he kept in a museum-grade preservation case in his office, protected behind bulletproof glass like scripture. "I will repay this meal." The door chime rang as he stepped inside, and Clara looked up with that same soft, knowing smile she'd given him 18 years ago. She had no idea she'd just served coffee to the most dangerous man in Chicago. She had no idea he'd bought the building she worked in, the block it sat on, and the 3 square miles surrounding it. She had no idea that somewhere in his organization, debt collectors were already preparing to seize her home for unpaid medical bills, and that when he found out, heads would roll. All she knew was that a well-dressed stranger had just sat down in booth 7, ordered the special, and was looking at her like she'd once saved his life. Subscribe to see how this unfolds and comment where you're watching from. I will love to say hello to you just to know how far our story is going. The rain came down in sheets the night Clara first saw him, turning the streets outside Dream Diner into rivers of neon and shadow. It was 2:47 a.m., that dead hour when the city belonged to insomniacs, addicts, and people running from things they couldn't name. She was wiping down the counter when the door opened. No chime. The mechanism had broken 3 weeks ago and management said they'd fix it next month, which meant never. The boy who stumbled and looked like he'd crawled out of a grave. 12, maybe 13, with a gray hoodie so soaked it clung to his skeletal frame like a second skin. There was a tear at the shoulder, edges frayed and darkened with something that might have been blood. He didn't look at her. Didn't look at anything except the laminated menu taped to the wall, eyes scanning the prices with the desperate mathematics of hunger. His lips moved, counting something only he could see. Clara had worked the graveyard shift for 6 years. He knew the look. Knew the difference between someone who was broke until payday and someone who'd been broke so long they'd forgotten what full felt like. The boy slid into booth 7, the one with the cracked vinyl that management also promised to fix next month, and started pulling coins from his pockets. Quarters clinked against the table. Dimes rolled in small circles. Pennies scattered like confessions. His hands were shaking so badly he had to count 3 times. Clara pretended to organize the coffee station, but she was watching. Always watching. That's what you learned in a place like this. Watch without looking, listen without hearing, remember without asking. $4.19. She saw his shoulders drop when he reached the final count. The cheapest thing on the menu was $6.50, and that was just coffee and toast. He started scooping the coins back with mechanical precision, the motion of someone who'd performed this particular ritual too many times. No tears. No anger. Just acceptance, flat and final as a gravestone. Coffee's on the house tonight, sweetheart. Clara set the plate down before he could argue. Scrambled eggs, toast with butter melting into the crust, green beans she'd taken from her own dinner portion, and a piece of fried chicken from the batch they'd have thrown out in 20 minutes anyway. Steam rose from the food in delicate spirals, carrying the smell of salt and fat and something that might have been salvation. The boy looked at the plate, then at her, then back at the plate like it might be a trap. Some cruel joke the universe was playing on someone who'd stopped believing in kindness. Go on, Clara said softly. Before it gets cold. He picked up the fork with both hands, gripping it like a weapon or a lifeline, she couldn't tell which. The first bite went down like he'd forgotten how to swallow. The second went faster. By the third, he was eating with the desperate efficiency of someone who knew food could vanish as quickly as it appeared. Clara turned back to the coffee station, giving him privacy for something that felt sacred. Outside, the rain kept hammering the windows, and the Dream Diner sign flickered twice before holding steady, casting everything in that particular shade of red that makes the world look like it's bleeding. She heard a sound. Small, choked, trying to be silent. When she glanced back, the boy's shoulders were shaking. Tears streamed down his face, cutting clean tracks through the grime on his cheeks, dripping onto the plate and mixing with the eggs he couldn't stop eating even as he wept. Clara's heart did something complicated in her chest. She'd seen a lot in 6 years of graveyard shifts. Seen people at their lowest, their meanest, their most desperate. But she'd never seen someone cry while eating before. Never seen gratitude that looked like grief. She walked over with a napkin, just a cheap paper thing with the diner's logo printed in faded blue, and set it beside his plate. He looked up at her with eyes that were too old for his face. Eyes that had seen things 12-year-olds shouldn't even know existed. "Thank you," he whispered in an accent she couldn't quite place. "Korean maybe. Or something close to it." The words came out broken, like he'd had to reassemble them from pieces. "You're welcome, baby." Clara's hand moved before she could think about it, resting briefly on his wet hair. He flinched but didn't pull away. "You need anything else, you just let me know, okay?" He nodded but didn't speak again. Just kept eating with that same desperate precision until the plate was clean enough to pass inspection. Until even the grease was gone, soaked up with the last piece of toast. When he finally finished, he sat there for a long moment, staring at his hands. Then he did something strange. Pulled a blue ballpoint pen from his hoodie pocket, the cheap kind you get free from banks, and wrote something on the napkin in careful, deliberate strokes. For characters that looked like art and mathematics had a baby. Clara couldn't read them, but she could read the intention behind them. A promise written in a language that felt older than the rain. The boy stood up, left his $4.19 in coins stacked in a perfect pyramid on the table, and walked toward the door. He paused there, hand on the frame, and looked back at her one last time. His eyes held something she couldn't name. Determination maybe, or the kind of debt that goes deeper than money. Then he was gone, swallowed by the rain and the 2 a.m. darkness of a city that ate children and spat out ghosts. Clara picked up the napkin, squinting at the foreign characters. The ink was already starting to smudge from the moisture, but the intention remained clear as a vow. She didn't know why, but she kept it. Slipped it into her apron pocket and carried it home at dawn, then pressed it flat in her grandmother's Bible between Psalms 23 and 24, where it slowly turned brown at the edges like a prophecy written in ballpoint and rain. The napkin haunted her for 3 days. Clara would find herself reaching into her apron pocket during slow moments, fingers brushing the Bible's worn leather spine when she got home, imagining those 4 careful characters like they were a message she was supposed to decode. On the 4th day, she showed it to Jean, the Korean line cook who worked the weekend breakfast shift. "What's this mean?" She spread the napkin on the prep counter, now permanently creased and browned with age. Jean adjusted his glasses, leaning close. His eyebrows went up. "Where'd you get this?" "Kid wrote it. Few nights ago." She paused, not sure how to explain the boy who'd cried while eating. "He was hungry." Jean traced the characters with a thick finger, scarred from 20 years of kitchen work. "Babgapsel gapget supnida." He pronounced it slowly like a prayer. "Means, I will repay this meal. But it's old-fashioned. Formal. Like making an oath." "An oath," Clara repeated. The word felt heavy. "Yeah. This ain't casual. This is serious. Someone writes this, they mean it." Jean looked at her with something like respect. "What did you do for this kid?" "Gave him dinner." "Wasn't nothing." "Was something to him." Jean handed the napkin back carefully, like it was made of glass. "People don't write oaths over nothing, Clara. You changed his life that night. Remember that." But Clara couldn't remember because Clara didn't know. Didn't know that the boy had stood outside in the rain for 20 minutes after leaving, staring at the Dream Diner sign until his vision blurred. Didn't know he'd memorized every detail of her face. The way her eyes crinkled when she smiled, the small mole above her left eyebrow, the graceful efficiency of her hands. Didn't know he'd carved her name into his memory like scripture. The boy, his name was Sun, though he hadn't spoken it in so long he sometimes forgot it belonged to him. Walked through the rain until he found the condemned building he'd been squatting in for 3 weeks. The 4th floor had a hole in the wall that almost looked like a window if you squinted. That's where he slept when he could sleep, curled around the $4.19 he hadn't spent because something in him couldn't bear to use the money she'd refused. He pulled out a second napkin stolen from the diner's dispenser and wrote the same 4 characters again. Then again. And again. Filling the paper with identical promises until the blue ink bled into meaningless shapes. I will repay this meal. He said it out loud in the dark, testing the weight of the vow. His mother had taught him about debts before she disappeared. In their culture there were debts of money and debts of honor. Money debts could be forgotten. Honor debts followed you like shadows, growing longer as the sun set on your life. This was an honor debt. Clara had seen him, not through him, not past him, but actually seen him and fed him anyway. Fed him like he was worth something. Like he was human. Nobody had done that since his mother left. Sun pressed his forehead against the cold concrete wall and made a second promise, this one just to himself. He would find a way to survive this city. Would claw his way up from whatever hole he'd fallen into. Would become someone who could walk back into that diner and pay Claire back 1,000 times over. Would become someone she could be proud of. He didn't know yet what that would cost. Didn't know that survival in a city like Chicago required you to make deals with devils. And devils always collected with interest. Didn't know that within 2 weeks, a man named Hong Song would find him sleeping in that condemned building, would see something useful in a disposable boy, would offer him a choice that wasn't really a choice at all. Work for me or die on these streets before your next birthday. But that night, curled in the dark with a stomach finally full and a promise written in blue ink, Sun let himself believe in something he hadn't believed in for a very long time. Tomorrow. Maybe tomorrow could be different. Tomorrow was different. Just not the way Sun imagined. Hong Song was 63 years old and looked like someone's grandfather. The kind who'd sneak you candy and tell you stories about the old country. He wore reading glasses on a chain and always smelled like jasmine tea. When he found Sun in the condemned building, he didn't threaten. Didn't posture. Just sat down on a piece of broken concrete and poured 2 cups of tea from a thermos. You speak Korean? Hong Song asked in that language, offering 1 cup. Sun nodded, accepting it with both hands the way his mother taught him. The tea was hot and perfect and he wanted to cry again but didn't. Good. Your mother. Gone. Father. Never met him. Hong Song nodded like this confirmed something. I have a job. You do exactly what I tell you when I tell you, no questions. You eat every day. Sleep somewhere warm. In 5 years, if you're smart and lucky, you'll have money. In 10 years, if you're ruthless and clever, you'll have power. And if I say no? Hong Song's smile didn't reach his eyes. Then you stay here and winter comes, and by March I'll find your body in this building with the other bodies nobody claims. He sipped his tea. Your choice. But choose fast. I have other appointments. Sun thought about the napkin in his pocket. About Clara's hands setting down that plate. About the promise he'd made in blue ink. I'll work for you. Smart boy. The first year, Sun ran errands, carried messages, picked up packages, kept his mouth shut and his eyes down. Hong Song's organization dealt in everything the law said you couldn't. protection, smuggling, money that needed cleaning, debts that needed collecting with broken fingers. Sun learned fast that the world Hong Song built ran on fear and loyalty in equal measure. Fear kept enemies in line. Loyalty kept your people from putting bullets in your back. The second year he graduated to collections. Turned out being small and hungry-looking made people underestimate you right up until the moment you broke their kneecap with a tire iron. Hong Song called him useful. In that organization, useful meant alive. The third year, Sun killed someone. It wasn't dramatic. Wasn't personal. A rival gang member who'd been skimming product. Who'd made the mistake of pulling a knife when Sun came to deliver Hong Song's message. The fight lasted 8 seconds. The man bled out in 12. Sun threw up afterward behind a dumpster where nobody could see. Then he washed his hands and went back to work. Hong Song found him that night. Didn't say anything about the job, just asked, "You eat today?" "No, sir." "Come." They went to a Korean restaurant in Chinatown, one of the ones with private rooms where deals got made and bodies occasionally needed mopping up. Hong Song ordered for both of them. Bulgogi, kimchi, rice, soup, enough food to feed 4 people. "Eat," Hong Song said. Sun ate because he didn't refuse Hong Song. The food was good, but it tasted like ash. He kept thinking about Clara's diner, about steam rising from a plate, about the way kindness could feel like a knife in your chest when you'd forgotten what it looked like. "You did well today," Hong Song said. "You didn't hesitate. Didn't freeze. That's rare." "Thank you, sir. But you threw up after." Sun's hands stopped moving. He set down his chopsticks carefully, waiting for judgment or mockery or the kind of lesson that came with pain. Hong Song just poured more tea. "Good. The day you don't throw up, I'll worry. Means you've lost something important." He met Sun's eyes across the table. "I need soldiers. Got plenty of those. But I also need someone who remembers what it felt like to be human. Someone who can walk in both worlds. You understand?" "Yes, sir." "You're smart, boy. Smarter than you know. But smart isn't enough in this business. You need to be cold when it counts and warm when it matters." Hong Song's expression softened slightly, as close to fatherly as a man like him could get. "I never had children. Wife couldn't. So I built this instead." He gestured vaguely at the restaurant, meaning the empire beyond it. "One day this will need someone to run it. Someone who understands what we are and why we do it. Could be you if you want it." Sun thought about his promise. About repaying a meal. About becoming someone Clara could be proud of. Except he was pretty sure she wouldn't be proud of someone who killed people for money. "I want it," he heard himself say. Hong Song smiled. "Then eat. Tomorrow real training starts." The next 7 years were a blur of violence, strategy, and survival. Sun learned to read ledgers and read people. Learned which bones to break for a message and which ones to break for a lesson. Learned that in Hong Song's world, mercy was a weapon you deployed strategically, not an emotion you indulged carelessly. He rose through the ranks fast. Too fast, some of the older men grumbled, but Hong Song shut them down with a look. By 25, Sun was running operations across 6 territories. By 28 he was Hong Song's right hand, the person everyone feared and no one understood. They started calling him the Silent King because he never raised his voice. Never threatened. Just looked at you with those old, dead eyes and you knew down to your bones, that he'd already decided if you lived or died and nothing you said would change his mind. Hong Song died on a Tuesday. Heart attack, sudden and final. No drama. No last words. Just there one morning and gone by lunch. At the funeral, the entire organization turned to Sun. It wasn't a question. Wasn't even a choice. Power had already chosen him. That night, sitting alone in what was now his office, Sun opened the museum-grade preservation case he'd commissioned 5 years earlier. Inside, protected behind UV-resistant glass in a climate-controlled environment that cost more than most people made in a year, was a napkin. Browned with age. Creased. Smudged. With 4 characters written in fading blue ink. "I will repay this meal." Sun pressed his forehead against the cool glass and let himself remember what it felt like to be human. Just for a moment. Just long enough to remember why he was doing this. Then he closed the case, locked it, and went back to being the silent king. Because that's what survival had cost him. And he'd paid it willingly, one piece of his soul at a time. Sun ran the 7 dragons like Hong Song taught him. With fear when necessary, loyalty always, and a particular kind of invisible efficiency that made headlines disappear and bodies turn into rumors. Under his command, the organization expanded from 6 territories to 12, operations so smooth the police stopped even pretending to investigate. But every night, no matter how late the meetings ran or how much blood needed washing from his hands, Sun ended up in his office staring at a napkin in a glass case. His lieutenants thought it was strange. Ji-ho, his head of security, once asked about it during a particularly brutal week when they'd had to eliminate an entire rival cell. "What's with the napkin, boss?" Sun had looked at him for 3 long seconds, the kind of look that made men reconsider their questions before answering. "Reminder." "Of what?" "That I'm still paying a debt." Ji-ho never asked again. The apartment Sun lived in was worth $4.2 million. Penthouse view of Lake Michigan, floor-to-ceiling windows. Furniture that cost more than cars. He'd had it decorated by someone whose name you needed money just to pronounce. Modern. Minimalist. Cold as a morgue. He hated it. Most nights he'd stand at those windows watching the city lights bleed into the lake, trying to remember what Clara's face looked like. The details had started fading around year 5. Not all at once but in pieces. First the exact shade of her eyes. Then the specific curve of her smile. Then the sound of her voice saying "sweetheart," like it was a blessing. He had people search for her. Discreetly. Carefully. But Clara was a common enough name, and waitress at a diner wasn't exactly specific intelligence. Chicago had 300 diners. He could be at any of them. Or none. Could have moved, retired, died. The not knowing kept him up at night in a way violence never did. By 30, Sun controlled $200 million in assets. Legitimate and otherwise. He owned restaurants, clubs, shipping companies, real estate developments. Had offshore accounts in 12 countries and politicians in 3 states who returned his calls personally. None of it felt like enough. Because every time he made a deal or buried a rival or watched his empire expand by another block, he'd come back to his office and stare at that napkin and think, "I'm still not the person she saw that night." Clara had looked at a starving boy and seen someone worth feeding. Someone worth kindness. But Sun looked in the mirror and saw the silent king. A man who'd built his power on threats and bodies, who'd traded his humanity for survival so completely he couldn't remember what warmth felt like. He kept the napkin because it was the only proof he'd ever been anything else. Ji-ho found him like that one night, sitting alone in the dark office with just the napkin's case illuminated. It was 3 in the morning. They'd just finished a negotiation that involved 3 rival syndicates agreeing to new territory lines or facing total annihilation. "You should sleep, boss." "Can't." "Bad dreams." "No dreams at all." Sun traced the edge of the glass case with one finger. Just wondering if the person who wrote this promise still exists, or if I killed him somewhere along the way and didn't notice. Jiho was quiet for a long moment. He'd been with Sun for 8 years, survived 4 wars and a dozen assassination attempts, earned his loyalty the hard way. That earned him the right to speak truths most people couldn't. She's still out there? Jiho asked, nodding at the napkin. Don't know. You want me to find her? Sun's jaw tightened. He'd thought about it. He'd thought about it. But what would he say? Remember that kid you fed 18 years ago? Well, he became a monster. Surprise. No, Sun said finally. Not yet. Not until I can walk through that door as someone she wouldn't be ashamed to remember. Boss, respectfully, you run 12 territories. You've built something Hong Song couldn't even dream of. You feed 300 people's families through this organization. You're not exactly something to be ashamed of. I've killed 17 people personally. Ordered 43 more. Broken every law that matters and half the ones that don't. Sun stood, stretching the tension from his shoulders. That woman gave me food when I was nobody. Just because I was hungry and she was kind. I've spent 18 years becoming someone who doesn't believe in kindness anymore. You tell me if that's something to be proud of. Jiho didn't have an answer for that. Smart man. Sun locked the case, killed the lights and left. But not before whispering something to the napkin, a habit he'd developed years ago and couldn't quite break. I'm trying. I swear I'm trying. Just give me time to figure out how to be both. How to be strong enough to survive this world and good enough to deserve the one you showed me. The napkin, of course, didn't answer. Just sat there in its climate-controlled tomb, for characters in fading ink that felt more like an accusation than a promise. I will repay this meal. Soon, Sun promised himself. Soon he'd find her. Soon he'd walk back into whatever diner she worked in and lay his empire at her feet like an offering. Would prove that the boy she'd saved had survived. Had thrived. Would prove that her kindness hadn't been wasted. He just needed a little more time. A little more power. A little more proof that he'd earned the right to say thank you to the only person who'd ever asked for nothing in return. The first diner Sun bought was called Johnny's All Night. It was a dump in Wicker Park with roaches in the kitchen and a manager who laundered money for the East Side boys. Sun walked in at 2:47 a.m., ordered coffee and eggs and waited. The waitress was 50-something with tired eyes and an accent from somewhere in Eastern Europe. Nice enough. Efficient. But when she set down the plate, there was no recognition. No warmth. Just transaction. Wrong woman. Sun bought the diner anyway. Paid triple what it was worth, fired everyone and gutted it. The East Side boys complained until Sun had a conversation with their boss that ended with new territory lines and a profound understanding that questioning the Silent King's real estate investments was bad for your health. The second diner was called Rosie's. South Side. The waitress was 23 and definitely not Clara. Sun bought it anyway. Third was Mel's breakfast spot. Fourth was the Griddle. Fifth was Lucky's. By the 10th diner, his accountant started asking questions. By the 20th, his lieutenants were concerned. By the 35th, even Jiho, who usually kept his opinions to himself, had to say something. Boss, with respect, we've spent $18 million on diners in 6 months. The men are starting to talk. Let them talk. They think you're losing it. Am I? Jiho hesitated. In that hesitation, Sun found his answer. I'm looking for someone, Sun said, which was more explanation than he usually gave. Someone important. This woman from the napkin? Yeah. Boss, there are easier ways. We have people. Investigators. We could. No. Sun's voice went flat, the tone that meant the discussion was over. I do this my way. I need to see them. All of them. Need to walk into every diner in this city until I find the right one. Why? Sun didn't answer. Couldn't explain that he needed to feel what it felt like that night. The desperation, the cold, the moment of stepping through a door and finding sanctuary. Needed to recreate it until it made sense, until he could articulate what Clara had given him that went deeper than food. By Diner 42, Sun had started to lose hope. Chicago was bigger than he remembered. More diners kept opening. Some had closed and reopened under new names. The city was alive and changing, and Clara was a ghost he might never catch. Diner 43 was called Angelo's, run by a Greek family who didn't want to sell. Sun offered them enough money to retire and buy a villa in Santorini. They took it. Diner 44 was Sammy's soul food kitchen. Wrong cuisine, wrong neighborhood, but Sun bought it anyway because the pattern had become compulsive now, like a ritual he couldn't break. Diner 45 was the breakfast club. Trendy. Overpriced avocado toast and kombucha. Definitely not the kind of place that stayed open at 2:47 a.m. for desperate children. But he bought it anyway, fired the hipster manager, and converted it back into something that looked like it belonged in 1998. Diner 46 was Patty's pantry. Close. So close. Same neon sign aesthetic, same cracked vinyl booths, same coffee that tasted like burnt regret. But the waitress was wrong. The feeling was wrong. Sun sat in that booth for 3 hours drinking cold coffee, trying to understand why he was doing this. Trying to figure out if he was looking for Clara or looking for the version of himself who'd sat in a booth just like this one and cried over scrambled eggs. You okay, hon? The waitress, Betty, according to her name tag, set down a fresh pot. You've been staring at that wall for an hour. Just thinking. About what? Sun looked at her. Really looked. She had kind eyes. Probably had kids. Probably worked this shift to make ends meet, same as Clara had. Same as thousands of waitresses across the city who poured coffee and took orders and never knew they were the thin line between someone eating and someone starving. About whether I'm chasing a ghost or a memory, Sun said. Betty nodded like that made perfect sense. Well, ghosts are already gone. Memories, though, those you can find again if you look hard enough. Just gotta know where to look. She left him with that particular wisdom and a fresh cup of coffee, and Sun sat there thinking that maybe Betty was smarter than half his lieutenants. Diner 47 was supposed to be the last one. Sun told himself that. Told Jiho that. If this wasn't it, he'd stop. Would accept that some debts can't be repaid, some promises can't be kept, some moments are too perfect to ever find again. The diner was called Dream Diner. It was on the edge of his territory in a neighborhood that had rotted around it like fruit going bad from the outside in. Boarded windows. Broken streetlights. The kind of place where people disappeared and nobody asked questions. The neon sign was half burned out, flickering against the rain. Sun stood outside for 10 minutes, watching water slide down the glass, trying to breathe through the sudden spike of anxiety in his chest. This was it. He knew it the way you know things in dreams. Illogical, impossible, completely certain. Through the window he could see her. Older now, silver threading through her hair, but still wearing that blue and white uniform. Still moving with that same graceful efficiency. Still looking at the 3 customers scattered throughout the diner like they mattered. Sun's hands started shaking. The silent king who'd stared down rival bosses and dirty cops and death itself, stood outside a diner in a $15,000 suit with his hands shaking like he was 12 years old again, counting pennies in the rain. He made himself walk to the door. Made himself push it open. Made himself step into the warmth and the smell of coffee and grease and something that might have been home. Clara looked up and smiled, that same soft, knowing smile, and said, "Sit anywhere you like, sweetheart. I'll be right with you." She didn't recognize him. Didn't see the boy in the man. 18 years had carved away all the soft parts, left only angles and edges and expensive suits that cost more than she probably made in 3 months. Sun sat in booth 7. The vinyl was still cracked. The table still wobbled. Outside, rain hammered the windows and the Dream Diner sign flickered twice before holding steady. Some things apparently never changed. Clara came over with a pot of coffee and that smile. "What can I get you, hon?" Sun opened his mouth. Closed it. Opened it again. He'd rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in his head, planned exactly what he'd say, how he'd reveal himself, how he'd finally repay the debt that had defined half his life. But looking at her now, older, tired, still impossibly kind, all those words evaporated. "Coffee," he managed. "And the special. Whatever it is." "Good choice." She poured his coffee, steady and practiced. "Rough night." "You have no idea," Sun thought. But what he said was something like that. Clara patted his shoulder, brief, motherly, the same gesture she'd probably given 1,000 customers, and went to put in his order. Sun watched her move through the diner, watched her refill cups and clear plates and laugh at something an old man at the counter said. She was everything he remembered and nothing like he'd imagined. More real. More human. More impossibly, devastatingly kind. And she had no idea she'd just served coffee to the most dangerous man in Chicago. Had no idea he owned the building she worked in, the block it sat on, the diners scattered throughout the city like breadcrumbs leading back to this moment. Had no idea that somewhere in his organization, in a filing cabinet marked collections, there was paperwork with her name on it. Medical debt. Mortgage default. Court summons. His own people were coming for her. And Sun hadn't known until this very moment that the woman he'd spent 18 years searching for was about to lose everything to the empire he'd built looking for her. The irony would have been funny if it didn't feel like a knife in his chest. The special was meatloaf. Came with mashed potatoes that had real butter melting into them, green beans that actually had flavor, and a roll so fresh it was still warm. Clara set it down with that practiced efficiency, slid the silverware into place and asked if he needed anything else. "This is perfect," Sun said, and meant it in ways she couldn't understand. She smiled and moved on to the next customer. Sun stared at the plate, at the steam rising in delicate spirals, and felt something crack in his chest. He'd eaten in Michelin-starred restaurants. Had personal chefs who'd trained in Paris and Tokyo. But nothing, absolutely nothing, had ever looked as good as this $8 plate of meatloaf in a dying diner at 3 a.m. He ate slowly, savoring every bite, watching Clara work. She moved like water through the space, always in motion but never hurried. Refilled the old man's coffee before he could ask. Brought the couple in booth 3 extra napkins without being prompted. Laughed at jokes that probably weren't funny because laughing made people feel seen. She was exhausted. Sun could see it in the slight droop of her shoulders, the way she leaned against the counter between customers. He wanted to tell her to sit down, take a break, let him hire someone to cover her shift for the rest of her life. Instead, he ate his meatloaf and plotted. The problem was elegant in its cruelty. Sun had spent 18 years building an empire specifically to repay one debt, and that empire was now actively trying to collect a different debt from the same woman. His collections department, efficient, ruthless, exactly as brutal as he'd trained them to be, had Clara on a list. 3 months behind on medical bills from her mother's cancer treatment. Mortgage in default. Court date in 6 weeks. Standard procedure was seizure of assets, garnishment of wages, systematic destruction of credit until the debtor either paid or disappeared into the kind of poverty they never climbed out of. Sun had designed that system himself. Had made it efficient specifically because mercy was expensive and fear was cheap. And now his own machine was aimed at the one person in the world he'd burned the entire organization down to protect. He pulled out his phone, typed a message to Jiho. Need all files on Clara Hartwell. Dream Diner, East Side. Every debt, every collector assigned, every piece of paper with her name on it. 1 hour. Then because he couldn't help himself. And I need to know who assigned her to collections. Names. Jiho's response came back in 40 seconds. On it, boss. Clara came back to refill his coffee. How was it? Best meal I've had in 18 years. She laughed like she thought he was exaggerating. Flattery will get you free pie, but you gotta mean it. I mean it. Sun looked up at her, trying to find any hint of recognition in her eyes. Nothing. Just friendly professional warmth, the kind she probably gave everyone. You been working here long? 6 years. Maybe 7. Time blurs when you work graveyard. He topped off his cup. You from around here? Used to be. Came back recently. Not a lie, technically. He'd been back for 18 years. Just not as the person she'd remember. Place looks the same. Yeah, well, owner don't believe in upgrades. Says the charm is in the decay. Clara rolled her eyes fondly. I say the charm is in not getting shut down by the health inspector, but nobody asks me. Sun filed that information away. The owner. Someone he'd need to deal with. You like working here? He asked. Clara paused like the question surprised her. Like maybe nobody had asked before. Yeah, actually. It's honest work. People need food, I bring it. Simple. Clean. Helps me sleep during the day, you know. Knowing I did something that mattered. Something that mattered. Sun thought about his empire. The territories, the money, the fear, the bodies. 20 years of work that mattered to shareholders and subordinates but meant nothing to anyone who wasn't counting cash or nursing broken bones. Clara had fed one hungry boy 18 years ago and it had changed his entire life. Had built an empire chasing the ghost of that kindness. And she didn't even remember. You matter, Sun said quietly. More than you know. She looked at him strangely then, like she'd heard something in his voice that didn't match the expensive suit. Yoke-han, you look like you've seen a ghost. Maybe I have. Clara's expression shifted into something more maternal, more concerned. She slid into the booth across from him, breaking about 5 rules of customer service, and studied his face. Long night. Long 18 years. Want to talk about it? Sun almost laughed. Almost told her everything. Almost laid out the whole impossible story. I'm the boy you fed and I became a monster looking for you and now my monsters are coming for you. And I don't know how to be the person you thought I was while also being the person I had to become to survive. Instead he said, not yet. But maybe soon. Well, offer stands. I'm a good listener. Comes with the job. She patted his hand, brief, warm, exactly the way she'd touched his hair 18 years ago, and stood. You need anything else? Just the check. She brought it. $8.73, written in pencil on the same kind of green guest check they'd used 18 years ago. Sun pulled out his wallet, custom leather worth more than this entire diner, and left $100 bill. Clara's eyes went wide. "Hon, I can't. Keep it." Son stood buttoning his coat. "For the meatloaf. And the kindness. Both were worth it." He was halfway to the door when Clara called out, "Wait your change." Son turned, backlit by the flickering neon sign, rain hammering the windows behind him. He looked at her, really looked, memorizing every detail, and smiled. A real smile. The first one he'd allowed himself in years. "No change needed. I still owe you more than I can ever pay back." Then he stepped into the rain and disappeared into the kind of darkness that made men like him, leaving Clara standing there with $100 bill and the strangest feeling that she'd just met someone important. Someone she should remember but couldn't quite place. Son sat in his car for 20 minutes, watching the diner through rain-streaked windows, waiting for Jiho's report. His phone buzzed. "Got everything. Spat boss. Debts at $47,000. Court date March 15th. Hernandez assigned it. He's been aggressive." Son's jaw tightened. Hernandez. One of his best collectors. Efficient. Ruthless. Exactly the kind of person Son promoted. He typed back. "Hernandez is reassigned. Effective immediately. Clara Hartwell's file is closed. All debt forgiven. Make it disappear. Boss, that's going to raise questions. Let it. Anyone asks, tell them the debt was paid by an anonymous benefactor." "Jiho?" "Yeah. The owner of Dream Diner. I want the building. I want the business. I want the whole block. By Monday. Whatever it cost." "You got it. Anything else?" Son looked at the diner, at Clara moving through the space like a lighthouse in a storm, and made a decision that would change everything. "Yeah. Clear my schedule for the next month. And find out everything about Clara Hartwell. Where she lives, what she needs, who's giving her trouble. Everything. Boss, you sure about this?" Son thought about a promise written in blue ink. About 18 years of searching. About the difference between the person he'd become and the person he wanted to be. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." He started the engine and drove away, leaving the Dream Diner sign flickering in his rearview mirror like a beacon calling him home. The debt was about to be repaid. Clara just didn't know it yet. Son owned Dream Diner by Monday morning. The previous owner, a man named Vincent Russo, who'd been using the place to launder money for the Delano Street Boys, took Son's offer of $800,000 for a business worth maybe $50,000 and didn't ask questions. Smart man. Stupid men asked questions. Smart men took the money and disappeared. The building inspector who'd been scheduled to shut the place down for health violations got a call from someone important who suggested he might want to reevaluate. The inspector discovered that actually, upon further review, Dream Diner was in perfect compliance. Funny how that happened. The medical debt company holding Clara's $47,000 in bills received a wire transfer from an offshore account. Anonymous benefactor. Debt satisfied. Case closed. The mortgage company threatening foreclosure received similar treatment. Clara's loan was suddenly marked paid in full, with a notation that the borrower had restructured through a private refinancing company that definitely existed and definitely wasn't a shell corporation Son controlled. By Wednesday, Clara Hartwell's financial life had been surgically extracted from the edge of disaster and placed on solid ground. She just didn't know it yet. The notifications would come in the mail. Official letters with stamps and signatures that made everything legal and invisible. Son was good at invisible. What he wasn't good at, apparently, was noticing when his own organization was still hunting the same woman he'd just saved. He found out Thursday night during a routine briefing. Jiho was walking him through collections, territory disputes, the usual business of running an empire built on fear and efficiency. Hernandez is pissed about the Hartwell reassignment, Jiho mentioned casually. He was 3 weeks from seizure. Says pulling him off cost the organization credibility. Sun's blood went cold. I closed that file. Debt was satisfied. Yeah, the medical debt. Mortgage too. Jiho pulled up a tablet, scrolling through data. But there's other stuff. She co-signed a loan for her brother 5 years ago. He defaulted. We bought the paper 3 months ago through that secondary lending company we own. Hernandez has been working it under a different case number. How much? 18,000. Plus interest and penalties, call it 23. Sun's hands curled into fists under the table. He'd been so focused on the obvious debts, the ones in her name, the ones threatening her directly, that he'd missed the secondary exposure. A co-signed loan buried in a portfolio of bad debt they'd purchased in bulk, processed by an algorithm that didn't care about names or faces or women who saved boys with blue ink promises. Where's Hernandez now? Started contact this week. Standard procedure. Calls, letters, visits to the place of employment. Jiho paused, reading Sun's expression. Boss, he didn't know. Nobody knew she was, whatever she is to you. It's just a file. She's not a file. Sun stood, grabbing his coat. Where does she live? Boss. Where does it live? Jiho pulled up the address. Sun memorized it and headed for the door. You want backup? Jiho called after him. No. I want Hernandez's phone number. And I want him to know that if he's contacted Clara again after this moment, he's fired. If he's threatened her, he's worse than fired. Make sure he understands. Boss, that's going to cause problems. You can't just. Sun turned, and whatever Jiho saw in his face made him stop mid-sentence. Watch me. The drive to Clara's apartment took 20 minutes through rain that hadn't stopped since Tuesday. Sun used that time to call Hernandez personally, a move so unusual it would definitely start rumors, but he was past caring. This is Hernandez. It's me. Boss. Then, boss? I didn't expect. Clara Hartwell. You contacted her. The co-signed loan? Yeah, standard procedure. I called her yesterday, left a message about setting up a payment plan. Why? That file is closed. Boss, with respect, this is a different case number. The system. I don't care about the system. I care that you never contact that woman again. The debt is forgiven. All of it. Every file with her name on it in any capacity is closed. Permanently. Hernandez went quiet. Sun could almost hear him thinking, trying to figure out what invisible line he'd crossed. Boss, I didn't know she was protected. Nobody told me. She is now. Spread the word. Clara Hartwell is off limits. Anyone in this organization, any company we own, any asset we control. If her name comes up, the file gets closed. Understood. Understood. But boss, she already got the message. I left it yesterday on her machine. Standard collections language about payment arrangements or legal action. Sun's grip on the steering wheel tightened until his knuckles went white. What time? Around 6 p.m. Why? Because Clara worked nights. Because she'd get home around 8 a.m., sleep until maybe 4 p.m. and check her messages before her shift. Which meant she'd heard Hernandez's threat yesterday. Had gone to work at the diner last night carrying that weight. Had smiled at customers and poured coffee and pretended everything was fine while his organization, tightened a noose around her neck. "Forget you ever heard that name," Sun said and hung up. Clara's building was exactly what he expected. 4 stories of crumbling brick fire escapes that probably violated 6 safety codes. The kind of place where the heat worked sometimes and the landlord never answered calls. 3rd floor, apartment 3C. Sun took the stairs 2 at a time. He was raising his hand to knock when he heard it. Crying. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just quiet, defeated sobbing that sounded like hope giving up. Sun stood frozen in the hallway, listening to Clara break down behind a door that probably didn't lock properly, in an apartment she couldn't afford, crushed by debts his empire had created. He'd done this. Not directly. Not intentionally. But he'd built the machine, sharpened its teeth, taught it to be efficient and merciless and blind to anything except numbers on a spreadsheet. Had created a system so good at destroying people that it had circled back and aimed itself at the one person he'd sworn to protect. The irony was sharp enough to taste blood. Sun knocked. Soft. 3 times. The crying stopped. Footsteps. The peephole went dark as someone looked through. A long pause. "Who is it?" Clara's voice, rough from tears and exhaustion. "It's me. From the diner. Tuesday night." "The meatloaf guy?" Despite everything, Sun almost smiled. "Yeah. The meatloaf guy. Can we talk?" "It's not a good time." "I know. That's why I'm here. Please." Another pause. Then locks clicking. 1, 2, 3. The door opened enough for Clara to peer out, and Sun's heart broke at what he saw. She'd been beautiful at the diner, tired but graceful, worn but kind. Now she just looked beaten. Eyes swollen from crying. Hair pulled back in a messy bun. Wearing a robe that had seen better decades. The kind of defeated that comes from being strong for so long that you finally just stopped. "How did you find where I live?" Not accusatory. Just exhausted. "I need to talk to you about your debt." Clara's face did something complicated. "You a collector? That why you left the 100? Some kind of psychological game?" "No. I'm the opposite of a collector." Sun met her eyes. "I'm the person making the debt disappear. It's gone. All of it. Medical bills, mortgage, the co-signed loan. Everything." "What?" "You're free. As of today, you don't owe anyone anything." Clara stared at him like he was speaking another language. "Why would you? Who even are you?" This was the moment. The one Sun had been building toward for 18 years. He could tell her the truth. Could explain about the boy and the napkin and the promise written in blue ink. Could lay his entire impossible story at her feet and hope she understood. Instead he said, "Someone who owes you more than money can measure." "Can I come in? I'll explain everything. I promise." Clara looked at him for a long moment. Then, against what was probably her better judgment, she stepped aside and let the most dangerous man in Chicago walk into her apartment. Neither of them knew yet that by tomorrow morning, this decision would save both their lives. Clara's apartment was small and clean and full of the kind of details that made a place a home instead of just rooms. Photos on the walls. Family, Sun guessed, though he didn't look close enough to intrude. Books stacked on every flat surface, mostly mysteries and romance novels. A coffee pot on the counter, half full and cold. "You want coffee?" Clara asked, already moving toward the kitchen. Hospitable even in crisis. That was her. "I'm good." "Sit. Please." She sat on the worn couch, pulling the robe tighter around herself. Sun took the chair across from her, maintaining distance, trying to look less dangerous than he was. "So, Clara said. You're telling me that all my debt is just gone? Does why? Who does that? Someone who remembered. Remembered what? A kindness. From a long time ago. Son leaned forward, hands clasped between his knees. You don't remember me. I don't expect you to. But 18 years ago you worked graveyard shift at this diner. Kid came in around 3 a.m. soaking wet, counting change for a meal he couldn't afford. You fed him anyway. Claire went very still. Dream diner. I've been there 6 years not. She stopped. Her eyes widened. Wait. You mean before? When it was called something else? When I first started working nights? Yeah. There were a lot of hungry kids. A lot of... Clara's hand went to her mouth. Oh God. The boy with the napkin. The one who wrote in Korean. That was you. Son felt something crack in his chest. Yeah. That was me. But you were so small. So young. Clara stood up, pacing, trying to reconcile the memory of a starving boy with the man in the expensive suit sitting in her apartment. How is that possible? What happened to you? I survived. Barely. Got picked up by someone who gave me work. Worked my way up. Did things I'm not proud of. Made money. Lots of it. Spent 18 years trying to find the diner where you fed me so I could say thank you and pay you back. Bought 47 diners, Clara whispered, piecing it together. You're the one buying all the diners. People have been talking. Some kind of real estate investor with too much money. That's you. That's me. Clara sat back down slowly, like her legs had stopped working. Why? Because you saw me. Not through me, not past me, but actually saw me. Fed me like I mattered. Like I was human. And I needed to find you. Needed to tell you that it worked. That you saved someone. That your kindness didn't disappear into the dark. Tears started sliding down Clara's face. Not sad tears. Something more complicated. I fed a lot of kids. So many. I never knew if it helped. Never knew if they made it. I made it, Son said. Because of you. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of 18 years settling between them. Then Clara asked the question Son had been dreading. What did you do? To make enough money to buy 47 diners. He could lie. Should lie. But something about Clara made lying feel impossible. Like her presence created a field where only truth could survive. Bad things, Son said quietly. Hurt people who hurt others. Built an organization that runs on fear. Became someone that boy you fed wouldn't recognize. Became someone you probably shouldn't have let into your apartment. Clara studied his face. Are you going to hurt me? Never. Are you going to hurt anyone else? I'm trying not to. Trying to figure out how to be both. How to be strong enough to survive this world and good enough to honor what you showed me. That's a hard line to walk. Yeah. I'm not doing great at it. Clara reached across the space between them and took his hand. Her fingers were warm, rough from work, exactly like he remembered. You paid my debts. You found me after 18 years. You're sitting here being honest about being complicated. That's not nothing. It's not enough. Maybe it doesn't have to be enough. Maybe it just has to be better than yesterday. He squeezed his hand. Thank you. For remembering. For caring enough to look. For... Glass shattered. The window exploded inward, spraying shards across the living room. Son moved on instinct, grabbing Clara and pulling her down behind the couch as gunfire erupted. 1 shot, 2, 3, punching holes through the walls, through the photos, through everything that made this place safe. Stay down, Son hissed, covering her body with his. More gunfire. Different angle. At least 2 shooters, maybe 3. Professional. Coordinated. This wasn't random violence. This was a hit. Sun pulled the gun from his shoulder holster. The one he always carried, the one he'd stopped noticing was there, and tried to think. They were on the 3rd floor. Fire escape probably compromised. Front door was a kill zone. They were trapped. Clara was shaking underneath him, breathing too fast. What's happening? Someone's trying to kill me. Found out I was here. Used you to draw me out. Sun's mind raced. I'm sorry. God, Clara, I'm so sorry. I brought this to you. We need to leave. Now. Claire pointed to a door. Bedroom window. Fire escape on the backside. They'll have it covered. Then we die here or risk it there. Your call. Sun looked at her. This woman who'd saved him twice now, who was somehow calm in the middle of gunfire, and made a decision. Back window. Move fast. Stay low. They crawled through the bedroom, glass crunching under their knees. Sun checked the window. The fire escape was clear. Too clear. Someone was waiting. Change of plans, Sun said. He typed a message to Jiho one-handed. Need extraction. Claire's apartment. Heavy contact. 2 minutes. Then he did something he'd sworn he'd never do in front of Clara. Something that would show her exactly what he'd become. He opened the bedroom window, leaned out, and fired 3 shots. Each one perfect. Each one finding target. Bodies dropped from the roof, from the adjacent building, from positions Clara couldn't even see. Sun's face was blank. The expression of someone who'd done this 1,000 times and would do it 1,000 more. He killed them efficiently, clinically, without hesitation or remorse, and the worst part was how easy it was. How natural. How he moved through violence like water, like it was a language he'd learned to speak fluently while forgetting how to say please and thank you. When the last body dropped, Sun turned back to Clara. She was staring at him with an expression he couldn't read. Fear maybe. Or recognition. Or the thing that happened when you finally understood what someone really was. We need to go, Sun said. My people are 2 minutes out. Clara nodded mutely. Let him help her through the window onto the fire escape. Followed him down 3 flights of rusted metal while sirens wailed in the distance. Didn't speak. Didn't look at him. A black SUV screeched around the corner. Jiho was driving. The back door opened and Sun shoved Clara inside, then climbed in after her. Drive, Sun said. Jiho drove. Clara sat pressed against the far door, staring at her hands. They were shaking. So was her whole body, delayed shock finally catching up. Who were they? Clara asked quietly. Delano Street boys. Russo's people. They didn't like that I took his diner. Sun handed her a bottle of water from the console. They'll regret it. You killed them. Yeah. Just like that. No hesitation. Yeah. Clara turned to look at him finally. Is that who you are now? The boy I fed, he became this. Sun met her eyes. Didn't lie. Didn't make excuses. Yeah. He did. I did. I became someone who kills people so efficiently I don't even think about it anymore. Became someone that boy you fed would be terrified of. Then why am I not terrified? The question hung in the air between them. Sun didn't have an answer. Couldn't explain why Clara was looking at him with something that wasn't fear, even though fear would have been rational. Would have been smart. I don't know, Sun said finally. You should be. Most people are. Most people didn't feed you scrambled eggs and watch you cry. Clara's voice was steady now. Clear. Most people don't know what you were before you became this. But I do. And I think maybe that boy is still in there somewhere. Buried. But still there. I'm not sure he is. Then prove me wrong. Clara leaned forward. You said you're trying to figure out how to be both. How to be strong and good. So try. Stop killing. Stop hurting. Use all that power you built to do something that doesn't leave bodies behind. It's not that simple. Isn't it? Clara's eyes were fierce now, the same maternal fire she'd shown when feeding a starving boy. You found me. You paid my debts. You saved my life tonight. That's 3 good things. Keep going. Do 3 more. Then 3 more after that. Eventually, maybe the good outweighs the bad. Sun stared at her. This woman who'd been shot at, who'd watched him kill 4 men without blinking, who had every reason to tell him to stay away forever. And she was sitting here telling him to be better. Believing he could be better. Like she still saw the boy in the man. Like 18 years of violence hadn't erased the person who'd cried over scrambled eggs. "Hey," Sun said. "I'll try. Promise." "Yeah. I promise." Clara nodded. Took his hand. Held it like it wasn't covered in blood and choices he couldn't take back. Outside the SUV window, Chicago blurred past in streaks of light and shadow. Sun had spent 18 years becoming the silent king, building an empire on fear and efficiency. Had convinced himself that power was the only way to honor Clara's kindness. But maybe he'd been wrong. Maybe the real way to honor what she'd given him wasn't to become unstoppable. Maybe it was to become someone who knew when to stop. Sun kept Clara at his penthouse for 3 days while his people swept her apartment for bugs, installed new windows and stationed security that looked like regular tenants. She didn't argue. Didn't complain about the expensive furniture or the $1,000,000 view. Just made herself tea in his kitchen and read mystery novels on his couch like this was normal. Like she hadn't watched him kill 4 men. Like he wasn't the silent king. On the 4th day she told him, "I can't stay here. It's safer." "I'm not talking about safe. I'm talking about what this looks like. What it means." Clara set down her book, fixing him with that maternal stare that made him feel 12 years old again. "You saved my life. You paid my debts. But I can't be kept. Can't be protected like property. I need to go back to my life." "Your life almost got you killed." "Your life got me almost killed," Clara corrected gently. "And I'm willing to accept that risk if it means you keep your promise. The one about trying to be better." That stopped him. "I'm not trying. I think it means you're trying to control things. Control is what you know. What you're good at. But being good? That's different. That's letting go." She stood, walked over to where Sun was staring out at the lake. "I'm going back to my apartment. Back to the diner. Back to my life. And you're going to let me. What if they come again? Then you'll deal with it. But you don't get to lock me in a tower because you're afraid. That's not protection. That's possession." Clara put her hand on his arm. "I need you to trust me to live my life. And you need to prove you can let someone exist outside your control. Can you do that?" Sun wanted to say no. Wanted to tell her that the world was dangerous and she didn't understand how many people wanted him dead. Wanted to explain that letting her walk out meant accepting risk he wasn't wired to accept. But she was right. Control was easy. Trust was hard. "Hey," he said. "You go back to your life. But I'm leaving security. Non-obvious. You won't see them." "Compromise," Claire agreed. "I can work with that." She left that afternoon. Sun watched from his window as she got into the car Jiho had arranged. watched until she disappeared into traffic and tried not to calculate all the ways this could go wrong. That night he called a meeting of his top lieutenants. 8 men who'd helped him build the 7 Dragons into the most powerful organization in Chicago. 8 men who'd killed for him, bled for him, followed him without question. 8 men who were about to question everything. "We're changing how we operate," Sun said without preamble. Jiho spoke first. "What kind of change?" "No more collections on medical debt. No more mortgage seizures. No more preying on people who can't fight back." Sun met each man's eyes in turn. "We're going to be better." Silence. "The dangerous kind." "Boss," Hernandez said carefully. "That's about 40% of our legitimate revenue. Medical debt portfolios, foreclosure recovery. We own 3 companies that do nothing but that. Sell them. Shut them down. I don't care. It stops." "Why?" This from Kim, his territory boss. "What changed?" "I changed." Sun stood pacing. "I built this organization to survive. To be strong enough that nobody could hurt me. But I didn't survive to become someone who hurts people like the person I was. I survived to honor a debt to someone who saw me as human. And you can't honor humanity by destroying it." "That's philosophical, boss," Jiho said. "But we have obligations. Partners. Debts of our own. Then we restructure. We keep the territories. Keep the protection. Keep the revenue streams that don't require breaking families." Sun turned to face them. "I know what you're thinking. That I've gone soft. That some woman has gotten in my head. Maybe you're right. But here's what's also true. I'm still the Silent King. I'm still the person who built this. And I'm telling you how it's going to be." "What about the Delano Street boys?" Kim asked. "They hit you. We can't let that stand." "No," Sun agreed. "We can't. But we respond proportionally. Take their territory. Destroy their revenue. Make them weak. But no civilians. No families. No burning down buildings with people inside. We're not terrorists. We're businessmen who happen to operate outside the law." More silence. Sun could see them processing, weighing loyalty against logic, trying to figure out if their boss had lost his mind. Finally, Jiho spoke. "This is because of her. The woman from the diner." "Yeah," Sun admitted. "It is. He asked me if I was a monster. Told me she couldn't love a monster. And I realized she was right. I'd become exactly the thing I'd promised myself I wouldn't be. So I'm changing it." "Boss, love makes men weak," Hernandez said quietly. "Maybe. Or maybe it makes them strong enough to admit they were wrong." Sun sat back down. "I'm doing this. You're either with me or you're not. But if you're not, leave now. No hard feelings. I'll pay out your contracts and let you walk. But if you stay, you follow the new rules." "Understood." One by one they nodded. Some enthusiastic, some reluctant, but all of them loyal. That's what Sun had built. Not just an organization but a family. Dysfunctional, violent, but family nonetheless. Over the next month, Sun systematically dismantled the parts of his empire built on suffering. Sold the debt collection companies to competitors. Forgave loans that couldn't be paid. Converted foreclosed properties into low-income housing instead of flipping them for profit. Cost him $40 million. His accountant nearly had a heart attack. His partners demanded explanations. His reputation took hits. People started whispering that the Silent King had gone soft, that he was vulnerable, that maybe it was time for someone younger and hungrier to take over. Let them whisper. Sun didn't care. Because every time he wanted to backslide, wanted to make the efficient choice instead of the good choice, he'd think about Clara. About the way she'd looked at him in the SUV and asked if he could prove her wrong about the boy still being in there somewhere. He was determined to prove her right instead. The hits from the Delano Street Boys stopped after Sun systematically destroyed their organization. Not through violence but through economics. Bought out their suppliers. Undercut their prices. Made them irrelevant through capitalism instead of corpses. It was cleaner. Slower. More expensive. But it meant Clara could sleep at night without worrying about bullets. Sun, on the other hand, didn't sleep much. Kept thinking about whether this was enough. Whether $40 million in charity erased 18 years of violence. Whether you could buy redemption the way you bought real estate. He didn't have answers. Just kept trying. Kept making choices that cost more and felt better. Kept hoping that eventually the math would work out in his favor. 6 months after the diner siege, Sun took Clara to see what he'd built. She'd been back to work for 5 months now, living her life, pouring coffee, being the same woman she'd always been. But Sun had been busy. Using his money and influence to build something different. Something that might matter. "Where are we going?" Clara asked as Jiho drove them through neighborhoods that had gotten cleaner, safer, less broken in the months since Sun started his redemption project. "You'll see." They pulled up in front of Dream Diner. Except it wasn't Dream Diner anymore. The neon sign was gone, replaced by something new. The Second Chance Center. Youth Services and Support. Clara's hand went to her mouth. "Son, what did you... Come look." He led her inside. The booths were gone. The counter was gone. In their place, computer stations, study areas, a commercial kitchen for teaching culinary skills, counseling rooms, a small medical clinic. "It's a youth center," Sun explained. "For kids like I was. Hungry. Homeless. Invisible. They come here, they get food. Education. Job training. Medical care. Nobody asks questions. Nobody judges. They just get help." "How many?" "We've served 300 kids in 3 months. Got 40 into job placement programs. 12 into colleges. 2 into culinary school." Sun walked through the space, touching the new walls, the painted surfaces. "I built it exactly where you fed me. Seemed right." Claire was crying. "This is what you spent that 40 million on?" "Some of it. The rest went to 3 other centers across the city. A housing program. Medical debt forgiveness fund. College scholarships." Sun turned to her. "I can't undo what I did. Can't bring back people I hurt or take back choices I made. But I can try to break the cycle. Can try to make sure fewer kids end up like I did, having to choose between starving and selling their souls." "Oh, sweetheart." Clara pulled him into a hug and Sun realized he was crying too. When had he started crying? "You did good. So good." They stood there in the empty center holding each other, 2 people who'd found each other across 18 years and an ocean of bad choices. "Is it enough?" Sun asked. "Does it make me less of a monster?" "You were never a monster. You were a survivor." Clara pulled back, cupping his face in her hands. "Monsters don't feel guilty. Monsters don't try to change. Monsters don't spend $40 million trying to save children they'll never meet. You're not a monster, baby. Just human. Complicated. But human. Can you forgive me? For what I became?" "There's nothing to forgive. You survived. That's what I wanted. That's what I prayed for every time I pressed that napkin into my Bible and hoped you were okay." Clara smiled through her tears. "You kept your promise. You repaid the meal. 1,000 times over. Sun pulled out a frame from his jacket pocket. Inside was the original napkin, the one he'd kept in a museum case for 18 years. The blue ink was faded almost to nothing, but the intention remained clear. I will repay this meal. Debts paid, Sun said. But I was hoping, maybe we could start a new promise? One where I don't disappear for 18 years. Clara laughed. What did you have in mind? Help me run this place. You're better with people than anyone I've ever met. These kids need someone who sees them the way you saw me. Need someone who knows that one kind gesture can change everything. You want me to quit the waitressing? I want you to keep saving kids. Just in a bigger space with better resources. Sun gestured around the center. Plus better benefits. And you'd be working with me. So I could make sure you actually take breaks and eat lunch and don't work yourself to death. Is this your way of asking me to date you while also offering me a job? Maybe. I'm not good at this. The honest feelings thing. Sun rubbed the back of his neck, suddenly awkward. But yeah. I'm asking. Both things. If you want. Claire pretended to think about it. The job, yes. The dating, you've still got work to do, proving you can be good consistently. Not just in grand gestures but in the everyday choices. In the moments when nobody's watching. I can do that. Then prove it. Clara smiled. Start by taking me on an actual date. Nothing fancy. Just dinner. Somewhere normal. Where we can talk about normal things. I don't know how to do normal. Lucky for you, I'm an excellent teacher. That night, Sun took Clara to a regular restaurant. Nothing fancy. No reservations. No recognition. Just two people eating pasta and talking about everything except debts and promises and the weight of 18 years. They talked about Clara's mother who'd beaten cancer. About Sun's plans for the center, the kids he'd met, the ones who reminded him of himself. About books Clara was reading and places Sun had never been. About small, normal things that felt revolutionary for someone who'd spent 20 years living in shadows. Afterward, he walked her to her door. Didn't invite himself in. Didn't assume. Just stood there like a teenager on a first date trying to remember how this worked. Thank you, Clara said. For tonight. For the center. For keeping your promise. Thank you for feeding me. For seeing me. For still believing the boy I was is somewhere inside the man I became. He is. I can see him. Clara reached up and kissed his cheek. Good night, son. I'll see you tomorrow. We've got work to do. Yeah. We do. Sun walked back to his car where Jiho was waiting, trying not to smile like an idiot. Failing. Good date, boss? Jiho asked. The best. As they drove away, Sun looked back at Clara's building. Saw her light turn on. Imagined her getting ready for bed, maybe pressing a new napkin into her Bible. Maybe writing her own promise in blue ink. He'd spent 18 years trying to repay one meal. Trying to become someone worthy of the kindness a stranger showed him in the dark. And maybe he'd finally done it. Maybe the debt was actually, truly paid. Or maybe that wasn't the point. Maybe the point was that some debts weren't meant to be closed. Were meant to be honored by paying them forward, by feeding the next hungry kid, by breaking the cycle of poverty and violence that ate children and spat out monsters. Maybe the point was that Clara had saved him twice. Once with a meal, once by believing he could be better. And now it was his turn to save others. The silent king was dead. Long live the man who'd learned to speak again. Who'd learned that power meant nothing if you didn't use it to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. Who'd learned that the boy who wrote promises in blue ink was still there. Still trying. Still human. Still worth saving. 3 years later, the Second Chance Center network had expanded to 8 locations across 3 cities. They'd served 4,000 youth, placed 600 in jobs, sent 80 to college. The Dream Diner's original Booth 7, cracked vinyl and wobbly table intact, sat in the entrance of the flagship location with a plaque that read, "Where kindness began. Where it continues. Where it never ends." Sun ran the organization. Clara ran the people. Together they built something that mattered. And sometimes, late at night when the centers were closed and the city was quiet, Sun would stand in that original space and remember what it felt like to be 12 years old and starving, counting pennies in the rain. Would remember a woman in a blue and white uniform who'd seen him as human. Would touch the framed napkin on the wall and whisper the same 4 words he'd written 18 years ago. "I will repay this meal." And he had. 1,000 times over. And would keep repaying it every single day for the rest of his life. And that's how a single act of kindness, a $6.73 meal served at 2:47 in the morning, changed 2 lives forever. Clara saw a starving boy and chose compassion. Sun received that gift and spent 18 years trying to become worthy of it. He built an empire searching for her, lost himself in the darkness, but found his way back through the same grace that saved him as a child. The Second Chance Centers aren't just buildings. They're proof that kindness multiplies. That one plate of food can feed thousands. That the boy who cried over scrambled eggs grew up to make sure no other child has to count pennies in the rain wondering if they matter. They do matter. You matter. If this story touched you, subscribe and hit that notification bell, because we have more stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things, about debts that can't be measured in money, and about the power of seeing someone when the rest of the world looks away. Drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. I want to say hello, want to know how far Clara and Sun's story has traveled. Are you watching from Chicago? So, somewhere in between? Let me know. I read every single comment. And if you've ever been that hungry kid or if you've ever been the person who fed them, share this story. Because someone out there needs to know that kindness isn't wasted. That it echoes across decades. That one moment of grace can change everything. I will repay this meal. What debt are you carrying? What kindness are you still trying to repay? Think about it. Until next time, keep choosing compassion. Keep seeing people. Keep believing that broken things can be rebuilt into something beautiful. This is your reminder. You are not invisible. You are not forgotten. You matter.